Fantastic. So as usual, everyone, I see everyone starting to come in. If you do have any questions throughout today's session, do please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom call. You can ask your question there, and then at the end of the session, I'll be able to ask them to our wonderful guests today. Likewise, if you want to join in on the conversation, please do feel free to use the chat function to speak with other attendees in the call, as well as Ish, who's my colleague, who's on the call ready to help you with any technical queries you may have during the webinar broadcast. Now, I think we'll get started. So hello and welcome everyone for coming along to today's webinar. My name is Frederick and I am your host for today's Tips Tuesday session. Now, today's session is focusing on the digitized home buying process and what that means for realtors. And I'm lucky enough to be joined today by Sean, who is an associate partner at McKinsey & Company's New York office and co-leads McKinsey's work in residential real estate in North America. He focuses on serving clients across the real estate value chain, from investors, developers, operators, technology firms, and brokerages, with a functional focus on technology disruption and analytics. This work revolves around positioning clients for success in a changing competitive landscape and developing wholly new capabilities that are required to win. He's also the former head of expansion at Compass, the fastest growing tech-enabled residential brokerage in the US, which is now valued $6 billion plus. So he's an incredible guest. We're over the moon to have him. Sean, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me on. Nice to meet you.
So the first question that I really wanted to ask you was, how did you start at McKinsey and what made you choose real estate?
So other than the fact that real estate is clearly the most exciting and compelling industry out there, I actually started my career at McKinsey, initially drawn to industries, large industries with legacy technology and in need of innovation. And the first place that I started my career was actually in the healthcare space because of some of those dynamics. I was lucky enough to then get recruited by Robert Refkin, who's the CEO of Compass, as you mentioned, one of the fastest growing brokerages in the US, and had the fortunate opportunity to lead growth and expansion, meet a few thousand real estate agents around the United States, open offices around the country, which really kickstarted a love and a passion for this space. I then came back to McKinsey to think about real estate as an industry more broadly and to understand what are the new and functional areas that can be applied and innovations that can be applied and will be relevant to real estate in the future, whether that be software development, advanced analytics, leading customer experience. And as you mentioned, I now work exclusively in that space across that broader value chain.
Fantastic stuff. So when it comes to sort of historically with real estate, you did mention this briefly, it's sort of lagged behind other industries in terms of adopting technology. What do you believe are the contributing factors to this sort of lagging behind?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, first of all. So real estate ranks as one of the least digitally mature sectors in the US economy. So it's something like 85% of the real estate and construction sector is categorized as early or developing in its tech adoption. So that ranks higher in the US only than healthcare and government, right? And so while it's kind of hard to make a generalization across real estate sectors, there's been a traditional way of doing business across real estate that's actually worked for a long time. So if you think about commercial, investors and developers would pursue a strategy largely driven by location selection. So you think of the adage, location, 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 and then eventually sell at a higher level a few years later. So they and the institutional allocators of capital to real estate could fairly safely rely on steady and stable returns by pursuing that type of strategy. In residential, it was really the advent of the online listing portals that sought to kind of democratize and consumerize residential data in the 2000s that was one of the most significant technology innovations. And what we do see on the residential side is whether it's the brokerage community or institutional investors that are investing in the space, there's something about the fragmentation of the market, as well as the size of the opportunity in real estate, that's often led to significant innovations being kept in-house rather than being developed and promoted by third parties looking to serve the entire market, right? And the logic there is if you can get a smaller slice of the transaction pie, but you can participate in higher commission rates and get a piece of the sale, then that might be more lucrative than selling, a monthly recurring software product to the whole market. But that's now actually starting to change.
And with those sort of changes that are coming along, what are you seeing in terms of innovation and technology advancements across real estate and specifically in sort of the residential area?
Yeah, so I think it's a really exciting time in residential real estate. First of all, you're seeing a massive amount of capital from outside of the real estate industry being dedicated to the space. And that comes in the form of, in many cases, newly formed and newly minted proptech funds and a plethora of now young companies that are looking to serve the space and breaking a little bit of that traditional mold where people now say, I want to serve the market. And that's really exciting. I think within the residential side, there's kind of two themes. One is that real estate is becoming less of an asset and more of an experience. And by that, I mean, you take the development and operator side, we're seeing a little bit of a paradigm shift where successful delivery of real estate is shifting to not only be about a physical asset, right? Like four walls, but a series of experiences within those four walls, right? Within that asset. That's often enabled by technology to allow for things like payments, messaging, merchandising, loyalty programs, and then even the procurement of physical services through technology at the standards that one might expect from something like the hospitality industry, right? So real estate's really elevating from an experience perspective. The second major innovation that we can spend some time talking about is what I call the expansion along the broader value chain, right? And so the online listing portals, in some sense, kind of led the way with this with regards to their expansion within their segment. So, for example, offering valuation services to prospective customers who are also looking to understand what property is available in their local market, as well as along the value chain, right? So think of Zillow expanding into iBuying, right? So they're physically buying homes on the market, offering mortgage products, title and escrow products further downstream, right? So you're seeing both expansion within individual verticals as well as along that value chain. And this concept of viewing the entire home buying process and home living process as an extended chain of opportunities is not actually even limited to the online listing portals. So if you just look at what the at-scale tech-enabled brokerages and the digitally enabled financial service providers are doing, they're trying to do the exact same thing. So real estate is becoming a series of adjacencies as opposed to discrete individual verticals that don't interact with one another.
Now, when it comes to those sort of steps of transaction, that process you've been talking about, what elements do you think are going to be digitized first, or have any already been done so?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think across the broader value chain, when we think about search and preliminary valuation, that traditionally was something that the real estate agent would perform on behalf of the consumer. I think with the advent of these online listing portals, a lot of that has been largely digitized, which is to say a consumer could find a short list of potential places that they might want to live or buy or rent online, and then they'll typically engage with their real estate agent. I think within brokerage, what we're beginning to see is the digitization of the office, so to speak, right? Primarily by third-party software providers. And the reason that I say that is, at least in the US, there's so much fragmentation that it hasn't been proven that the brokerages can create that much of this technology themselves in-house. And so they're relying, agents and brokerages are relying on a network of third parties to provide a number of interesting solutions from a technology perspective. And you can kind of think about that along the agent workflow, so to speak, as you categorize how some of those and understand how some of those work together, right? So first, you have this kind of lead generation component. And within that, you have the online listing portals. They have done a number of innovations and they offer advertising to agents that allow people to help build their business. You have referral engines that help agents send deals to one another, particularly across geographies where they're not able to service those customers with their customers themselves, right? And then third, there's a big component around virtual tours to help customers visualize spaces. That's particularly helpful and accelerated in a COVID environment, right? Where the opportunity to go in person is limited and tough. There's a next component around not just lead generation, but lead management, right? So these are things around CRMs and sales and marketing tools to really harvest the agent network. Many of those have been digitized. And there's kind of a plethora of those types of solutions out there. And agents are paying quite a lot of money for solutions like that. And in some cases, brokerages are internalizing those solutions or providing those at a discount to some of their agents. We also see things around lead scoring, right? So understanding who within your network should you prioritize in terms of reaching out to. And then things like predictive analytics and even demand forecasting algorithms. So things that say, which home is most likely to sell within a given geography in the next quarter. Things like that, which are really bringing some of the kind of new and emerging data science techniques to this space. Then I think that there is something around transaction management. So we've seen the digitization of forms in the United States, right? Where you can get many of the forms that you would need to buy a home or execute the sale of a home online. And then you combine that with e-signature products, online notarization. And then eventually, I think you get to a virtual meeting room where all parties, whether it be the buyer's agent, the seller's agent, the attorney if they exist, and then both sides of consumers can begin to collaborate digitally. That's a really interesting model, I think, and one that we're moving towards, but we haven't gotten there yet. And then I think further downstream, things like the title and escrow, the digitization of some of the financial products, that's all happening further downstream, and will continue to be, I think, continue to be enabled and accessed through digital experiences that either the online portals or the brokerages or the agents can create for their consumers across that process.
So it sounds as though the whole supply chain is sort of steadily being digitized. Do you think that's going to sort of become the norm and that most agents will sort of begin to just use sort of digitized versions of that supply chain throughout their entire process?
So it's an interesting question, right? I think you could hear some of the things that we've been talking about and say, oh goodness, it's going to become fully digitized, isn't it? Mm. And it's my perspective that many steps of the process will be enabled by technology, but that there is an important and even growing role for the practitioners within the space. Mm. And I think the way to justify that, I think, is to actually look at the data. Mm. So in the United States, you have $2.3 trillion spent on residential sales each year. The rate of using a real estate agent is 89%. And it's been consistent at exactly 89% over the last 7 years. Wow. What's changing is the commission rate paid between the consumer and the agent. That has risen between 2018 and 2019 from 5.1 to 5.7%. So not only are agents here to stay, but they're actually making more of the transactions in the future. And so what that tells me is not technology is coming to replace agents. It is to say, agents can use technology to optimize their personal operating model and to spend more time with their customers. So when we think about who's going to win here, I think it's both the consumer and the real estate agent. And innovations that are focused on making the agent more efficient will allow agents to reinvest their time to spend that time with their consumers, right? And their customers. And so I see, I see many of the parts of the process being enabled by technology, but I think that the role of the agent is here to stay for the long term.
Excellent. Brilliant. You've actually just taken my next question right out of my mouth, saying who will the winners be? It really will be everyone across the board.
So I think that's right. In terms of the technology providers and which of the software companies are going to win, in that respect, because I believe we're getting to a place where we don't have these individual verticals, but we have this integrated value chain. That will eventually have digital experience that connect the dots. The winners will be, first of all, the companies within each of those verticals that are the category winners. So think of the transaction management company. Clearly, it's the transaction management company that has the right set of products and a lot of market share within that segment. But critically, the winners will also be the ones that can integrate upstream and downstream with the other important products. So if you're the category winner in transaction management software, how are you making sure that you're integrating with the brokerages to create a digitized process? How are you also integrating downstream with the financial service provider such that when someone's typing in information, when a consumer is typing in information in the forms to buy the home, that information is then pre-populated in a loan application that comes downstream. And you don't have this painful process that you have today of filling out many of these forms over and over again with the same information. And so I think it's people not only just focused on winning in their category, but how they're well positioned across this kind of broader ecosystem.
Mm. Now, I know you've spoken a little bit about this already, but I was wondering if you could offer more sort of info on how these digitized processes are going to be useful to agents in their day-to-day work, and how that sort of measures up against sort of the traditional methods they're already using.
Mm-hmm. So what's interesting is, in spite of everything we've been talking about in technology, 2/3 of agents' business are generated from their existing sphere of influence and their existing network. So if you flip that question on its head and you said, does an agent need to use technology at all in order to win? You might say, well, there's actually certain segments of agents that are so experienced with such a great network that they can continue to use, their in-mail mailers, their mobile phones for texting, and they'll get their job done. And absolutely, I know agents who, for whom that's true. But because on average, 2/3 of the business comes from those traditional means, I would posit that for the majority of agents, in order to even sustain your annual production, and certainly to grow, and certainly to optimize your operating model so you're spending more time on working with your clients and you're becoming more efficient over time, then using technology is going to be really important. And then the question becomes, so where does the agent go to find all this technology? We've talked about a lot of different things, and even understanding which technologies are most relevant, which are the winners in each category, that is a non-trivial thing to figure out. And by the way, the agent should be spending most of their time with their consumers. So who's going to orchestrate that ecosystem, so to speak, for them? In my mind, that should be an emerging responsibility of the brokerage. But even if they're deciding not to build the technology themselves, they're helping to recommend, they're helping to provide discounts, and they're helping to potentially integrate different technologies so that they work with one another. When I talk with agents, they say, it's all well and good to have a fancy CRM, but if it doesn't connect to my email system or it doesn't connect to my transaction management system, what good is it? Because then I'm just copying and pasting a bunch of stuff in Excel. And by the time I've done all of that, I've saved all of the time that the CRM would have offered in the first place. So there really is something to that integration. And I think the brokerages should be helping the company, the agents to navigate that technology landscape.
Now, when it comes to the barriers, I think you've just described one there, but what other barriers do you think there are inside these sort of technologies becoming available that is preventing them from becoming widespread among both realtors and just broker communities?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there's a few dynamics at play. One, in the US at least, you have non-standardized data infrastructure. So basically, you have a network of these hundreds of MLSs around the country that function somewhat individually and independently, which means if a tech company wants to provide service to realtors around the country, they need to make hundreds of individually negotiated agreements across the country just to operate in those places. So that's one problem. The second barrier is agents are all independent businesses and they're entrepreneurs. And so you can have a relationship as a tech company with a brokerage, but the brokerage does not have that much influence over an individual agent's actions relative to other industries where you might have an employment agreement. So in order to sell to 1.47 million agents, you have to essentially have 1.47 million individual sales processes. And you could have two agents in the same office that sit at desks that are next to each other, and both have a different CRM. One uses a certain online listing portal for certain advertising. One uses Facebook and Instagram, and they're both equally successful, and they don't make decisions together. And so I think it's incumbent on the tech companies to figure out a more sophisticated go-to-market strategy that doesn't assume that all agents are just going to use whatever technology they throw out there, because it's expensive to actually get in front of those individual agents and convince each of those agents that it's important to use that technology, which has been one of the barriers traditionally.
Now, do you think this sort of movement towards digitized real estate spaces is the beginning of a purely online experience where one would actually be able to buy and sell property, whether that's residential or actually commercial, completely online without ever actually having to meet in person or do the showings?
So, in my opinion, I don't believe that that's going to happen for the majority of the market. And I think that there's a few factors at play. One, and let's focus on residential. On one hand, in the US, transactions happen once every 7 years. So as a consumer, a buyer or seller, you never get good at the process. And the process is complicated. And so because you're not good at it, and because it typically is a high proportion of your net worth, it's an emotional and important decision that technology alone and information alone cannot support that decision. And so I do believe that technology will help the consumer to make decisions and provide information and data that is more close to their fingertips to inform that decision. But I do believe that there is a role for the practitioner over time, right? And to me, the greatest proof of that is that stat of the increasing commission rates over time, in spite of technology rising, right? And more technology being available to the consumer. It's not chipping away at the consumer. It's actually powering the agent. And the agent is the one providing and provisioning that technology, the relevant ones to those consumers. So I think that's the case. Now, you could make the argument that you actually need to look at the property landscape in a bit of a segmented view, where the dynamic that I just described is true for the vast majority of the market. But you could make the argument that in rentals or potentially low-end sales in kind of commodity or communities where the properties look similar to one another, or large apartment buildings where each unit's not that different from one another, you could make the argument, like, for example, university household rentals, that technology can enable more of that process, where you could find the unit, you know about that building already, you understand what the pricing, there's no negotiation on the rent, either you take it or you leave it, you start paying the rent, you get approved, you start paying the rent, and then you move in. And many of those steps are digitized. I think it's likely in the rental side of the market that technologies are used more, and in some cases do replace some of the activities that were traditionally the responsibility of a rental-focused agent, like showing the home. You could imagine smart home technology that allows a specific person with a specific QR code to enter that home for a period of time, and videos to monitor what the person's doing when they're touring the apartment. But to me, again, it comes back to the fact that in most cases, people will want a trusted advisor. There's a reason that, the corollary that I would draw is in personal investing, all of the big private wealth management groups at the banks became scared when E-Trade and Scottrade came around, and you began to be able to trade stocks for a fraction of the cost online. And the private wealth advisors thought, oh my goodness, does that mean there's no role for us anymore? Fast forward 20 years, and JP Morgan Private Bank and Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management are some of the most profitable entities within those organizations. And that is because people still need advice and trusted advice for what is some of the most important financial decision-making of their lives. And so I think that that's going to continue to be the case and to support the role of the realtor in the future.
Excellent. Now, there is something I did want to pick your brain about. We recently had a guest speaker come in to talk about VR headsets and how relevant they are to real estate. Do you have any specific views on VR headsets? Are they useful? Are they a gimmick? What do you think?
I think that technology that an agent can use to quickly and efficiently show their clients what the market looks like and help certain clients understand what different layouts or different configurations, when you talk about VR, but there's also AR, right? In terms of the augmented reality of here's what a certain layout could look like. Here's what an island in the kitchen could look like. For example, I'm going through the process myself, and I have a very, I lack creativity where I can't really conceive of what a home or an apartment would look like until I see furniture in there, right? So for me personally, I see the value of doing something like that. And so there's clearly a consumer value. And I think the value to the agent is I don't need to waste as much time touring apartments. We can essentially do virtual tours together and then in a targeted fashion, go to the units that we want specifically, right? And that saves the agent time and it leads to a more directed process, I think, on the side of the consumer, and could frankly save a lot of money on the part of the landlord who may not need to do staging, could adopt technology and stage it 15 different ways for each different consumer if there is able to be technology that changes the configuration of the unit, for example, right? And I think we're absolutely seeing a pain point on both sides in a lot of the survey research that we've done in both the agent, the landlord, and the renter in terms of the process of scheduling showings, the process of the time-consuming nature of going and seeing those showings, particularly on the part of the owner who's renting, especially if they're not an institutional owner and they have a day job, they're a lawyer, someone wants to see the apartment, they're not actually that serious about the apartment, so they leave the office to go show it, and suddenly the person decides, actually I wasn't excited about this, I wish I had seen a virtual tour, right? That may lead to fewer tours, but tours with more interested folks, which takes less time away from everybody, which I think is a clear value for all parties.
Well, that's it. At the end of the day, everyone wants that extra time. They don't want to be looking at properties, but it's not only looking around, it's getting there. It's waiting for either the agent or for the potential client to show up. There's a lot of time that actually, once you cut it down, it just leads to more sales in the end.
Right.
Lovely. So my next question is asking you is proptech relevant across the entire real estate spectrum? Or do you think that only certain parts are actually worthwhile for the realtor themselves to look into?
So I think that technology is going to enable many parts of the process, right? And I think the evidence, whether you look at the capital flowing in to fund proptech, whether you look at the proliferation of young companies in the proptech space, and when you look at the spend that agents are currently spending today on those proptech software solutions, all of that suggests to me that there is an increasing role that technology has to play across the spectrum, right? And I think the question then is, how do the real estate agents use that technology and coordinate technology to better enhance their business? And how can they leverage technology to also benefit their consumers? Because I think with this increasingly complex ecosystem of proptech firms, the consumer who only goes through this process once a year, once every 2 years if they're renting, once every 7 years if they're buying, is going to be so far behind on the most recent technologies that I think it's the role of the agent and the brokerage to figure out which ones they should use. And so I think that they're a really interesting conduit between the proptech firm and the end user. And in some cases, the firms that do well will actually think of the agent as the core user and the consumer, the buyer and seller or renter, as kind of a secondary user to some degree.
That's a really good sort of point of view on it. So what is it that agents and realtors can do to sort of be ahead of the curve when it comes to sort of adopting these digitized methods?
Yeah. So I think in the US, the National Association of Realtors, the state and local associations, which represent, the NAR is the largest trade organization in the world, and then the state and local associations as well as the MLSs, they're doing a great job of exploring and vetting technology products. And I think that they're a great resource to help agents and brokerages explore new technology. Speaking with the CEO of one of the local associations in California, who set up a technology vendor evaluation committee that meets weekly and evaluates on a monthly basis whether new technologies can come in and be provided within, as part of the member dues that can be provided for free to the agents within their member group, which I think is just a terrific use of that local association time and resources. And then I think keeping apprised, as an individual agent, keeping apprised of the, real estate technology news is another really good way to hear about new startups that are gaining traction and expanding to your local market. I'll do things as simple as, Google News alerts for new types of technology in real estate that will give me kind of a regular and daily rhythm of who's getting funding, who's expanding, which one should I pay attention to. And then the last one, which I alluded to earlier, is I think real estate agents should ask and demand more from the brokerage, right? I think it should be an increasing component of what the brokerage is offering, what they're doing to vet and recommend, and then potentially even discount, so that the brokerage is essentially acting as a bulk purchaser and providing those discounts to the agents to use. And that should be, I think one of the ways that an agent is making decisions about which company to work at is based on, what technology does my brokerage provide or does have in-house that I can use.
Definitely. Now, when it comes to sort of getting these tech features implemented, do you think if major property portals started adopting these different technologies, do you think that would actually then encourage the rest of the market to sort of jump on board?
So I think we see evidence of the big online property portals, the classifieds, already doing that. Whether it be thinking about offering valuation services to say what's the value of the home, to saying, to beginning to offer virtual tours, to beginning to offer software that will help landlords collect rental payments, to screen tenants, to have a universal application, to offer a financial product, to offer a title and escrow product. I mean, those companies, I think, are leading the way in terms of innovation in many respects, and are figuring out where they need to acquire, whether they need to build, and where they need to strategically partner with leading tech companies that are playing across the space. And so I think it's not only going to happen, but I think it's already happening that those portals are adopting those technologies. And I think that is inspiration for the rest of the group. And frankly, I think it's encouragement to the young company founders that are saying, hey, listen, there is actually a market for these types of solutions. And in real estate, the exciting part for some of those young companies is it's a highly acquisitive business where certain technologies, like Contactually was acquired, a CRM company acquired by Compass. So one path is you're acquired by a brokerage. Another path is you're acquired by a big online listing portal. Another path is you're acquired by any of the other companies that are in the space, or many of them are actually pursuing a path to IPO, right? And so there is, I think, a lot of potential avenues that these young companies can follow if they're starting off in the space. And just as I mentioned, 1.47 million users and $120 billion commission pool. So it's a big field to be playing on.
Now, my last question for you today, as part of our interview, is, in your opinion, what do you think the real estate industry is going to look like in about 20 years from today?
Yeah, so I think if we fast forward that far into the future, I think that we've seen a little bit of a bifurcation by the end user and the end property, right? So I think that we end up seeing the continued primacy of the high-end brokerage with high levels of support and high commission rates earned by agents who are working in these full-service companies that are very technology-enabled and highly efficient. And that looks similar to the high end today, but more enabled by technology. Then I think that there's another side of the market, which we're beginning to allude to when we talk to rentals, where it becomes less of an advisory business and more of an efficiency play, where customers are pretty confident in as to the demand for, if they're a seller, the demand for their property based on valuation tools out there, demand forecasting algorithms. As such, they don't require maybe as expensive of an agent, and they try to do as much of the process digitally as possible. And there's a whole bunch of digital tools that might be enabled by agents, but it's really quite tech forward in terms of that. And I think that there's a bit of a split. And so I think that's the case on within brokerage. And then I think we do actually see a more digitized home buying process. Now, you could ask the question, which of those components are less likely to be digitized in 20 years fully? I mean, one of the places that's currently the rate limiting factor in that process is the mortgage process. That is one where you may have a direct to consumer mortgage originator, like Rocket Mortgage, right? Or better.com. They have a pretty good front end experience, but the back end is still pretty traditional. And it still takes several days or weeks in order to execute the mortgage. There's been an aspiration to digitize and automate that business for decades. And we're at where we're at now. And so, I think that there is a world in which that continues to be the rate limiting factor. And I think what we will see is, for other elements further downstream of the process, like title and escrow, where we're beginning to see real automation speeding up the process, right? So we see advanced analytics and data science speeding up the search and examination time. I think that will continue to happen. And it won't just be focused on, for example, the refi segment, but it will also spill over into the home purchase segment. And I think those steps become a lot shorter. And as a result, pricing around, the regulation around pricing might drop in favor of the consumer because it's essentially less effort and more technology enabled. But yeah, I think it would be curious. I'm very curious, given how much innovation is happening. I'm very curious to see what happens even in 5 years. Let's see what happens after that.
Who knows? We might be onto the holodeck.
Yeah, exactly.
Walking through completely projected properties. You never know.
It could be the digital twin city, right? Exactly.
Now, I see we've had a whole host of questions asked by our audience. Would it be all right for me to ask you some?
Please do, yeah.
Fantastic. So let's pull these up. So our first question is, do you find working at McKinsey challenging? And what type of work do you typically do with your clients?
So I think the work at McKinsey is a ton of fun. It's definitely hard work. I won't lie. But I typically work with, as you mentioned earlier, right? Companies across the real estate ecosystem. And so what's really cool about that is we get to see similar topics from very different vantage points, right? And so, a common theme has been, how do we create a leading digital customer experience? Which obviously looks very different for an investor and a developer, real estate developer, than it does a brokerage, for example, right? But we're trying to solve the same problem coming from two different angles. Similarly, we spend a lot of time on software development and thinking about how to accelerate the digital strategy of many of these players, which has been a lot of fun. And so I think it's a mix of working with traditional players across the ecosystem, but on very new cutting edge topics, which has been a lot of fun.
Fantastic. So our next question is, what will the adoption of technology in the real estate industry mean for smaller businesses?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting is many of the technology firms out there are pursuing kind of a double-pronged, two-headed strategy with regards to go-to-market. They have a brokerage channel, and then they have a direct-to-agent channel. And I think the cool thing is, for the small businesses, that direct-to-agent channel means that almost anyone can access that technology as long as they're operating in one of those markets, right? And so the technology in some ways is kind of a democratizing force, where if it were the case that it was just the brokerages developing technology for themselves, then you would say, well, technology is good for the biggest players that have scale and have the money to invest, but it's too bad for the small companies that have 3 agents and don't have the ability to hire software developers. But what's happening is there's actually a lot of development happening on the part of third parties, which means that I think it's actually leveling the playing field to some degree. And those efficiencies that one might expect and that higher level of customer service and the time savings that one might expect from using technologies is actually available to everybody. And that should be, I think, a good thing for the small companies.
Excellent. No, I 100% agree with that. I think it's incredible, just the accessibility of all these different tools that you can just get at a click of a button. It's really helping people be able to do things actually they wouldn't have been able to do 10 years ago, let alone 20. So our next question is, are there any negatives to investing in proptech?
So I guess you have to think about that question from the perspective of who is investing in the proptech, right? So there's the investment community investing in the proptech. I mean, I think in that space, one would need to look at the overall opportunity within the individual segment that we're talking about, the amount of competition in that segment, and how well you trust that team. That's fairly generic. I think if you're talking about a brokerage or an agent investing in technology, I think that's an interesting question where you have in a world where you have limited time and resources, you actually need to be, I think, quite smart about picking and choosing which battles you want to fight and which vendors you want to try. And I think those companies and those agents that have a bit of this agile approach, which is to say, I'm not going to make a long-term commitment to any one technology that has a multi-year integration associated with it, but I'm going to be willing to try over monthly or bi-monthly tests where I test out individual vendors and immediately see the traction and the results of those individual products as a way to understand which technologies are most useful. I think those are the ones that are going to be successful, because there's so many technologies coming out that it's hard to bet on one and know for sure that you're making the right decision. So those that have a bit of an approach to keep testing on an ongoing basis and have it be just a thing that they always do, I think will be the companies that are successful in that domain.
Fantastic. Now, another one of our attendees has asked, if tech increases sales, why doesn't everyone adopt the same tech or strategy?
It's a great question. And I think there is, at the end of the day, some of the dynamics that we talked about with regards to the data landscape not being integrated and a highly fragmented brokerage community, 120,000 brokerages in the US, highly fragmented agent community, means that it's really hard to get everyone to adopt the same thing, right? And so what it does is actually creates opportunities for more companies that are fighting to serve those large groups, right? And so I think what we're seeing is themes and topics, so categories of products are doing well, right? So if you think of the online listing portals and the digitization of the search experience, that is a highly successful, fairly well-established type of company, right? And those have done very well. And so, I think what we're going to do is we're going to keep seeing that certain themes are winning, but it's unlikely that you get any one company with truly dominant market share, I think, because of the nature of the fragmentation of the end user.
Wonderful. Now, our last question, I think this is a really good one, is what is one piece of proptech technology you are excited about in the future?
So my kind of cheeky answer to this is I'm excited about whomever is able to offer the technology that connects the individual steps together.
Mm.
And it's unclear at this point who is going to be able to offer that.
Mm.
And by that I mean, right, what if there is a technology where I could go from my phone to explore the range of properties, to begin to understand what the valuation of those properties are, to making an offer still on my phone, to getting pre-approved for a loan, to working and negotiating pricing with the other side, to filling out all the right forms, to applying and getting approved for the mortgage, to getting home insurance and home inspection and appraisal, to title and escrow, and then connect that to a whole range of moving services that allow me to do home upgrades and home renovations and understand the valuation of my home as I do that. That then connects back to me wanting to sell the home, right? If I think about that currently distinct chain, right? And I think about what the technology I'm most excited about, it's not any one thing, but it's how amazing and how simplified that experience would be if I could connect those dots.
A one app does all.
One app, one website, maybe it's one agent does all, enabled by technology. And they're the guide, right? They're the person who is shepherding you through that process in the near term. And eventually maybe it's in an app, but as we said before, I think that there's a role for the person in that process to kind of orchestrate that process for the consumer.
No, exciting stuff. So all the agents in on today's session, take notes. This is all incredible advice and brilliant sort of insight from Sean. Sean, thank you so much for coming along to today's session. It's been incredible. You've given pearls upon pearls of wisdom. It's been a joy having you. Thank you for coming along.
Very nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, you can come anytime. It has really been a joy. Everyone watching, thank you so much for coming along as well. I hope this has been informative. I hope you've learned a lot. I know I have. We will be back again on Friday for our future Friday session. So do please make sure to come along to that. Otherwise, do please stay safe and stay healthy out there and have a really wonderful rest of your week. Until next time, keep it 360. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.